Hello everyone, welcome to the second last day of the J. Krishnamurti and the Contemporary World Crisis Conference. Today we have three long-term teachers and now also in some capacities leaders who have been involved with Krishnamurti's educational philosophy for a long time. Shailesh, Shirali, Vaishnavi, Narayanan and Anantha, Jyothi, Dasari. We are very happy to have you at this conference, and we are really looking forward to hear of your experiences, because a lot of people have been asking, okay, what's the practical side of Krishnamurti's work, what happens in his school and all that. So we are really looking forward to hearing from you, and each of you will have 15 minutes to share your thoughts. So let's start with Shailesh ji, and followed by Jyothi ji and Vaishnavi ji. So Shailesh ji, we are ready to hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen and then we'll get started.
Sure.
Yeah, so good morning to you, though it's nearly night here. And thank you very much, Professor Acharya and Professor Ashwani, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this event. So I'm going to describe, just as was suggested, some of the things, how I got into this whole business of studying Krishnamurti and getting involved with Krishnamurti education. I have it in the form of a slideshow here. So like anybody, I think like many of the speakers who have already spoken here, my encounter happened purely by chance, really speaking in a bookshop. And I was immediately attracted by the transparent simplicity of writing, the extraordinarily simple way in which he put across whatever he wanted to say, with no jargon, no quotations, no authorities being claimed. And also those extraordinarily sensitive, exquisite, you can say, depictions of landscapes and of nature that resonated with me very strongly. Well, one way or the other, I ended up joining Rishi Valley as a teacher in 1983, and I have been with the KFI schools ever since. So what I'm going to explain now is, what is it about Krishnamurti's approach to education that particularly attracted me? First of all, let's look around the world. We see these extraordinary multiplicity of crises, the environment breaking down with an uncertain future, particularly for the younger generation, a tremendous pandemic, you can say, of authoritarian governments all over the world, equally a pandemic of fundamentalism and nationalism, and this extraordinary divide happening between the rich and the poor, particularly, say, in countries, some countries. And then consumerism, which is, of course, linked with the environmental crisis. The whole entertainment industry, people getting lost in more and more and more in entertainment. And because they are getting more and more sophisticated also. And then echo chambers, which are a phenomenon which has really multiplied in recent times because of the internet. People getting locked into their own opinion circles. And then this new thing called fake news, which is enabled by artificial intelligence. So we have really a tremendous multiplicity of crises going on. And alongside that, you also have this mind-boggling miracles of science. Right now, you have this vehicle which has been put down on Mars. Look at the amazing technology which lies behind that, and the technology behind artificial intelligence. So you ask this question, how is it possible that you can have such extraordinary happenings among us coexisting with such a primitive mindset? So I'm going to quote here something from Martin Luther King, which says here, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason but with no morals. Now you may wonder why I'm quoting Martin Luther King here, but I think there's a close parallel between what he is saying and some of the things that Krishnamurti says, though of course it's put in very different language. So when you look at all this, you ask, how do we look at this? Are we going to look deeply into the problems and ask where they come from, look into their very bases? Or do we examine only symptoms and try to only make small modifications in them, be content with patchwork reform, which really has been the way for centuries. We approach things from the outside, or as the next slide shows, our traditional response has completely been in the province of social engineering, which means that we try to fix problems through forces from some other direction. Everything is fixed by putting an alternate force, trying to engineer things in a particular direction. You have laws which try to control wrong behavior. You have incentives by which you try to encourage certain kinds of behavior. You have policing, the whole philosophy of reward and punishment. And reward and punishment essentially deals only with the outer of human beings. You never touch the core. You're always treating the behavior end of a person. And this whole way of thinking, which is there endemic in our society itself, has come into our schooling systems. So exactly the same approach is followed everywhere. So now look in contrast at this quote from David Bohm, a very powerful quote. David Bohm, close associate of J. Krishnamurti. We are faced with a breakdown of general social order and human values that threatens stability throughout the world. Existing knowledge cannot meet this challenge. Something much deeper is needed, a completely new approach. I am suggesting that the very means by which we try to solve our problems is the problem. Now, this is a very radical quote. And of course, Krishnamurti has made many such statements. And if he is starting to doubt the very approach that you have, the very means by which we try to solve problems, then it puts us into an almost impossible situation. How are we possibly going to tackle a problem when our very approach itself is leading to more problems? And now I go on from now here to what Krishnamurti says. Let's look at the traditional aims of education. What are they? Build up your knowledge, base of knowledge, get to know the world, build up your expertise in a variety of subjects, in a variety of disciplines, hone your skills, perfect them to the greatest extent possible, skills such as reading, writing, reasoning, computing, public speaking, and of course, all the skills connected with sports and music. And then also social, cultural, and intellectual development, the development of your talent to the highest capacities possible. And then most of all, the last line is a very key line in this, the traditional aim of education, preparing for professional life and preparing for a career. In fact, today, I think I would not be wrong to say that for most children, most parents going to school, essentially they see school as a stepping stone into professional life, which means that the main thing that they're going to be looking for is to maximize what they get from that whole experience, maximize their competitive edge, their ability to race ahead of everyone else. That's the way it has been organized. And these seem innocent enough. Who would argue against getting more knowledge and more skills and learning, reading, writing, and all? They look innocent. But the difficulty is that we are not such simple beings. We are complicated. We have a desire for security. We have the urge to power, to dominate, to conquer, to possess. We fall in love with our own skills, that narcissistic aspect of ourselves. We fall in love with our knowledge. These things give us a sense of great power. And of course, when you have power, there's devastation of both man and nature. And I think that's exactly what we see happening all across the world. Now, if this is the situation across the world in our education system, what is the alternate? So what does Krishnamurti tell us? He's telling us, first of all, that the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but he who does not know himself. Now, he who does not know himself, that statement sounds very simple and bald, just a few words, but there's a tremendous amount contained in that little sentence. Understanding comes only through self-knowledge, which is the awareness of one's total psychological process. Thus, education in the true sense is the understanding of oneself. Conflict results from wrong relationship with people, with things, and with ideas. And until we understand that relationship and alter it, acquiring skills can only lead to chaos and destruction. And then he points out that education has overemphasized technique. And in overemphasizing technique, we destroy man. Because technique without self-understanding makes you a ruthless person. That's exactly what Martin Luther King also was pointing out. Life is pain and joy, beauty, ugliness, love. And when we understand it as a whole, that understanding creates its own technique. So you'll notice how Krishnamurti is turning everything upside down. Is it possible to have an education system in which technique does not form the center of the education system? Technique comes about by itself when these other components are there, when you start to experience life as a whole, and when there is self-understanding. So can there be an education system which is like that? That is what Krishnamurti is asking, and that is what really attracted me to this whole question. And he says, a school is a place where one learns the proper place of knowledge, which means not only the relevance of knowledge where it is relevant, but also the irrelevance of knowledge in places where it is not relevant. It's a place where one learns the importance of relationship, which is not based on attachment, where one learns to observe the world and oneself. That means the observation has been made the core of education, which means one has to learn the art of listening and looking and learning. This is something which Krishnamurti has emphasized very greatly, and it puts the challenge on us. Can we devise an education system whose core is observation, whose core is learning how to listen, how to look, and how to learn? Now, how does one actually take this forward into a Krishnamurti school? So here are some practices which are well known in the Krishnamurti schools. Those who are not familiar with the Krishnamurti schools may not know of them. For example, we have the culture classes, which are right through the curriculum from the lowermost class to the uppermost, highermost, where we look at ourselves, we look at life, we talk. The whole focus is on discussion and examination, looking at ourselves. There's no curriculum as such, but you can say the curriculum is attention. The curriculum is observation. Then class 11 in particular has a course, which is like a course called Contemporary Studies or General Studies, in which rather than looking just inwards, you're also looking outwards. I'll explain that in the next slide. Then there's also at the junior school science area, in that area, a great deal of focus on observation, which means touching, feeling, smelling, seeing things, your whole skill of observation. So the whole point is to heighten your ability to look at the world and ourselves and grow in self-awareness. So the point of general studies is to understand for ourselves that the outer is a mirror of the inner. So when we see the tremendous exploitation and degradation of environment, how does it mirror our own attitude towards the environment, our own utilitarian way of looking at nature, at trees, at the so-called natural resources? The very term resources in some ways degrading to nature. Then the phenomenon of authoritarian governments which are spreading all across the world, it comes from within. Can we understand our own authoritarian tendencies? Can we understand from where fundamentalism springs, nationalism, the idea of echo chambers and all opinion circles? Where do all these things come from? Our own need for entertainment and our opinions constantly reinforced. So this outer mirroring the inner and the inner being representative, you can say, of the outer is a very important notion. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. What are students' responses like? Well, it's a mixed bag. Typically, you'll find when you talk about all these things, you have very animated discussions. Lots of people participate with a lot of energy. Some of them are very eager learners. They are eager to converse with you about these things. They see the connections between the mess outside and the conflicts within, and how one is a mirror of the other. You also find a few children cheating in quotes, by saying what they think the teacher wants to hear. Uh, so they are playing to the gallery, you might say. Also, there are children who find it difficult to connect with some of these issues when it becomes a discussion-oriented class. Perhaps they are late bloomers, they are not able to easily connect with discussion. So you find all kinds. But the thing is, it's a continuous challenge. For example, whenever you talk of environmental problems or problems of authoritarian government, environmental misuse or consumerism, they quickly want to get involved with activist kind of activity. So the real challenge is not to say no to that, but to take the inquiry inwards and to see oneself, which, because as is written out here, the last line, you are the world, and to actually see that the problem is not just out there, some bad fellows there, and let's just get rid of those bad fellows and everything will be solved. That whole idea is there in lots of people's minds, but to really understand that the problem stems from within is a very difficult idea. And also part of the challenge is strong opinions. When you talk about these things, you meet very strong opinions, and the challenge is also for the teacher, because they bring out the same opinions inside you. You will find yourself getting impatient, feeling in conflict, and taking sides. It's a great challenge for us. So in this short presentation, there are so many issues which I have not touched on, which need to be talked about in these classes. What is our attitude to success and failure? Very important question, because it dominates so much of our thinking. What's our attitude towards talent? If we happen to be talented, what's our relationship to that talent? What's our relationship, our feeling about authority, about power? How do we look at fear and hurt, when fear is something which dominates so much of our lives and shapes so much of our lives? How do we learn through these experiences, through these discussions, to be simple and quiet? How do we learn this all-important thing of not reacting? Can we talk about what goes into reactions? And how so often when we talk about problems, we are quick to divide. We have inherently divisive approach in us, and to learn what constitutes divisiveness and what it means to love the earth as a whole. So I just conclude by this last line, that the teacher cannot belong to society, a very subtle and remarkable statement that Krishnamurti made long back. And there's a huge amount in that. And one has to, I think, spend half a life trying to understand what that means, that a teacher cannot belong to society. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shailesh ji. That was a wonderful presentation. I really liked the emphasis that you have placed on Krishnamurti's educational philosophy and how it operates in the schools. I had the chance of spending 3 months at Brockwood Park School at one point. I studied the system there. And the points that you have shared are closely connected to what happens at Brockwood Park School. You said a lot of things, but a couple of things I would like to emphasize for the listeners. I think one thing, the point about the psychological evolution in the future of humanity, Bohm and Krishnamurti discuss this point very deeply, that we think that human beings have advanced a lot, but that advancement is only in the sphere of the outward life. So in terms of technological production, in terms of scientific progress, we have advanced a lot, but when it comes to the inner feelings which cause a lot of problem in the world, whether it is hatred or fear or insecurity or anxiety or unhappiness, I don't think we have dealt with that properly. So for those of you who are new to Krishnamurti or would like to understand that is his key focus. So no problem, no issue with the outward advancement and growth, but unless we also see who we are inwardly, that outward growth can be very problematic. The person can develop the atomic bomb and the another person can drop it too. So that means that the only advancement in knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that we have actually grown inwardly or developed inwardly. So thank you very much. I think I'll stop at that because of the time, the constant of time that we have today. So thank you again. Jyothi ji, are you ready to share your thoughts? You are on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Do that. Okay. Right. When I joined Rishi Valley School, Shailesh was the principal, and I really did not realize until later how gently he has nurtured me as a teacher. Thank you, Shailesh. Maybe I'll share with you two anecdotes to see how it happened quite unconsciously. So I taught in Rishi Valley for 8 years, and then I joined, and I don't want to go through the rest of it, but I was also taught in England for some time. Two of the placements I had during my teacher training in England were quite difficult. So in one of the teacher training, there was this one boy who was having some difficulty at home, and his class teacher was telling him that, look, you're not alone, we are with you. And I happened to be the practice teacher at that time in his class, and she told him, look, we all care for you. They used to call me Mrs. Dasari there, and she said, Mrs. Dasari cares for you. And something he said really struck me. He said, yes, maybe you both care for me, you judge me, Mrs. Dasari does not. And I was not even aware of it, but somewhere it was echoing in my mind that this is what I had learned. I learned in Rishi Valley, I would say, but that sounds so presumptuous. I think it just got imbibed in you. I remember many assemblies Shailesh had given. One particular assembly he had given, he said, everybody has their own dharma and you have to be in touch with it. Somehow that assembly has stayed with me, and every now and then I remember that particular assembly. After I joined Rishi Valley, I grew into many roles. I was a class teacher, a middle school coordinator, so on and so forth. And I would often see how others are dealing, say, for example, with discipline. And I would just imitate them. Being in a Krishnamurti school, I was imitating people. And then somewhere it was jarring that something was not in place. And then slowly this particular assembly would come back to me that I need to be in touch with my own being in order to carry out my duties. And then going back to another episode in England, uh, in England, they give you all levels of students, and particularly on Monday mornings, I would really meet this particular bunch of students, 5 or 6 of them in all, but the whole school seemed to have difficulty with them. One of them was called Craig, and one day he turned to me and said, don't talk to me like I am Pooh. And I told him, I don't talk to Pooh like that. It was a spontaneous response because you never talk down to any child. And after that, there was a remarkable transformation in our relationship. He would do whatever I ask him to do, but that is not the point. I agonized over how this child would be feeling to think that people spoke to him like he was a piece of poo. So these have been some of the journeys. And coming back to my presentation today, quite often we have been uh, looking at, one second, let me share the screen. How do we explore certain themes? So we thought of, for example, in middle school, we would like to explore things like identity, friendship. So how does one do that? So I'm just going to take you through a very small presentation. I may skip some of the slides too, to show what we had actually done with students. And this was during the recent pandemic. So I'll just go to the present mode. Yes. So exploring Krishnamurti with 12-year-olds and reflections through some poetry. It takes some time. Just bear with me.
Number 5 question is, who are you? Is that an important question? Or would you say, who am I? Not who you are, who am I? And if I tell you who I am, what does it matter? It's a bit of curiosity, isn't it? It's like reading a menu at the window. You have to go into the restaurant and eat food. But merely standing outside and reading the menu won't satisfy your hunger. So, to tell you who I am is really quite meaningless. First of all, I'm nobody. Right? That's all. It's very simple as that. I'm nobody. But what is important is who you are. What are you? When they ask who you are, in that question is implied, you are somebody very great, therefore I'm going to imitate you. The way you walk, the way you talk, the way you brush your teeth or whatever it is.
Okay. So keeping that as a prompt, actually, we pondered about these questions. Who am I? Who are we? And I'm just sharing the slides that I'd shared with the students. And we looked at some poems. And this is, I am nobody. Who are you? Are you a nobody too? And this is Emily Dickinson's poem. I'll allow you to read it for yourselves. It's not so much about the poem. Poems are just a kind of a window or a door you get into the minds of the students. So we gave a little bit of introduction to who Emily Dickinson was. So though she was asking this question in the poem, I am a nobody, who are you? Everybody knew that she was indeed somebody. So why was she saying that I am a nobody? Maybe she was trying to say that I just want to be myself. I do not want to impress anybody. Now, please pardon me if these things are too simplistic, but do remember we are dealing with 12-year-olds, and also not to underestimate a 12-year-old because they do come up with surprises sometimes. So along this journey, we were also looking at a totally different picture of who do you think you are? Another beautiful poem by Carl Sandburg, where it is taking apart a person in scientific terms. So who do you think you are, and where do you think you came from? From toenails to the hair of your head, you are mixed of earth, of the air, of compounds equal to the burning gold and amethyst lights of the mountains of blood of Christ at Santa Fe. Listen to the laboratory man tell you what you are made of, man. Listen while he takes you apart. Weighing 150 pounds, you hold 3,500 cubic feet of gas, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. From the 22 pounds and 10 ounces of carbon in you is the filling for 9,000 lead pencils. In your blood are 50 grains of iron, and in the rest of your frame, enough iron to make a spike that would hold your weight. From your 50 ounces of phosphorus could be made 800,000 matches, and elsewhere in your physical premise are hidden 60 lumps of sugar, 20 teaspoons of salt, 38 quarts of water, 2 ounces of lime, and scatterings of starch, chloride of potash, magnesium, sulfur, hydrochloric acid. You're a walking drugstore and also a cosmos and phantasmagoria treading a lonesome valley. One of the people, one of the millions of Mermaidians who would like an answer to the question, who and what are you? So from there on, we went, I'll not take you too many other poems. So are you a child or adult? I think my screen is I'm not able to see him because our panel comes into the screen, but I would just give you a few minutes to read it for yourself. I'm a child or an adult. Shailesh, if you are able to see it, could I ask you to read the poem if you don't mind?
Some words have got cut off here also, but I think I can make out. Am I a
Okay.
child or a child? No, not a child now. My dolls are gone. My dream world has rippled away. I am tall. I understand adult talk. But does that mean I am an adult? Am I an adult or a child? No, not an adult. I couldn't look after. Sorry, some word is missing. The understanding is just not there. I pay a half fare on a bus to school, but does that mean I am a child? Am I a child or an adult? No, not a child now. It's not a teddy bear. His cherished position is taken just because my toys have lost their value. Does that mean I am an adult? Am I an adult or a child? No, not an adult. I do not see the reasons for adult disputes. I am safe in non understanding. But does that mean I am a child? Well, am I a child or an adult? No, not one or the other now. One pace in front of childhood and one behind an adult. Soon I shall stride into a new world, the world of adult life.
Thank you so much, Shailesh. Okay. And this is another favorite poet of mine, Miroslav Zek poet. And he just ponders about what is there in a boy's head. Is there a spaceship and a project for doing away with piano lesson? And there is Noah's Ark, which shall be first, and there is an entirely new bird, an entirely new hare, an entirely new bumblebee. There is a river that flows upwards. There is a multiplication table. There is antimatter, and it just cannot be trimmed. I believe that only what cannot be trimmed is the head. There is so much promise in the circumstance that so many people have heads. Okay, and then just some questions. Quite often, we sometimes seek ourselves in others, and I'm talking to middle school students here. Quite often, we try to make friends with those who are like us, or we try to belong to a group by being like others in that group. Teaching in a school, we are all aware of this. Like Krishnaji said, we try to walk like them, talk like them, and maybe even brush our teeth like them. Is that really true? So, some questions and some prompts. And just two more poems about friendship, and then I'll share with you some of the responses of the students. This is a favorite poem of mine, and I can so identify myself with this and my students. So this is a poem on friendship. Since we moved here, God, you're the only friend I've got, which is okay, I guess, or maybe not. I mean, I sure would like to have a buddy my own size. I bet you know that though, since Mama says you're wise. Could you give me a new friend, someone with a basketball? You and me will still be friends and all, but right now I need somebody who'll invite me out to play. Is that okay? This last poem is called Killing Fields. It's from the point of view of a 12-year-old in Rishi Valley school, so I could call it a Rishi Valley poem. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. They keep me off the game. They won't let me in the team. Nobody to help me, nobody to talk to. I'm like a sitting duck waiting for my turn, for somebody to get injured. Then reluctantly they let me in as the goalkeeper. I spoke to my games teacher. My chance came 3 weeks later. I shot 7 goals. Now everyone wants to be my friend. So after we went through this, some prompts were given. This was the writing task. Just what they think about it, what have they understood, what they've not, what do they agree with, what they do not agree with, and whether they do like or identify with some poems. And then I would like to share with you some of their responses. Once again, keeping time in mind, I'll just brush upon one or two response. I'll not go through all of them, just a line here and a line there to see what is actually happening in their minds. That is just acknowledgement of where I've taken the poems from. Right. So, for example, here is one child talking about his favorite poem being Killing Fields. And he says, I've experienced this so many times in Rishi Valley, but no one came to me and talked to me about this. And here is another student saying, I don't think I've seen any of this because I think he has also studied abroad for some time. Where I come from, it's a multicultural country where everybody treats everybody the same. We have people from Africa, etc., etc. Maybe I'll skip the other. And here is another response. I understand the topic. The idea is that you should be yourself and not lie to yourself or somebody or something. Sometimes people want to be friends who are exactly like them. Sometimes people try to be another person for something or to belong to a group. No matter what, you have to be yourself. I agree on this. I went through this situation once and it talks about some of this child's experience. Once again, I think I'm cut off being the presenter here, but I'll try to read what is there. I think it's talking about how you often have to fit into a group and cannot be yourself. That is one's thought. And another thought is, what does one do when one is in a conflict? And very beautifully, the child has said that you always compromise because you want to fit in. Oh, this is a real pity. I got cut off this. Okay. I like this child says that he mostly liked what Krishnamurti has said, because he said, Krishnamurti says it's all okay to be nobody because you have this freedom to be nobody. It actually frees you up, and that is very cool, he says. So that I thought, in their own language, they're saying that it's cool to be a nobody, and that Krishnamurti has probably given permission or has opened their mind to that kind of a freedom.
Jyothi, I can see all of the slides. If you want me to read anything, let me know.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, I actually went through this situation once. I think this child is talking about the killing fields. I think that was one poem that many people could relate to. I went to someone and asked them if I could play with them. They said, of course, and I played with, no, I think this is a child who also studied in England for some time and had come to India. And she talks about how when she was in England, how she initially felt very hesitant to join a new group. I was Indian and the only new girl. So for 1 week, that is the first week, I did not try to make friends and had no friends. I was playing by myself, but one day I went to someone and asked them if I could play with them. They said, of course, and I played with them. From then on, I had lots of friends. I learned from this that only if you're different, you're special. So always respect differences. Maybe the other two you could read, Ashwani, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'll try. The poems were wonderful. People who are racist uh, and the people who are stereotypical maybe should have learned something from these poems. Lots of people in the world judge people by their color and their clothes and accessories. These poems are meant for those people to not judge people from their cover.
Okay.
I really like the number one poem. I always thought we should never judge people by their color or what they are like outside. We shouldn't judge people from outside because people tend to imitate, like Krishnamurti ji said.
Okay, thank you. I understand that we are ourselves and not anybody. I agree with Krishnaji that we are nobody. I like the killing fields because it means a lot. Like you can do whatever you want if you try, and people want to be friends with you only if you do something cool. I will skip the other one. Now I would like to, all those poems were done with class 7 students, and I've just given you a representation of the kind of thoughts that were going through them. And in a way, it's not that they have arrived at any answers, but somehow they're trying to seek something within themselves or ponder about these questions. And I then come to this poem. This happened a few weeks ago, maybe last week or the week before. I was doing this poem, Desiderata, and these are not class 7 students. These are class 12 students. In fact, we were doing revision. Because I cannot see the screen, I will just read it from my own text, which I have here. So in the very first stanza, this is a kind of didactic poem. And students in the 12th usually don't like poems like this because they think somebody is preaching to them. But it did give an opportunity to talk about something, and I'll share what it is. Go placidly amid the noise and haste. These lines are not here, but I'll just read them in any case. And remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even to the dull and ignorant. They too have their story. And the question that had come up was, how do you talk with somebody who is so dull and boring? And I think that led to a very interesting discussion of where do these judgments come from? So, who are the ones who decide which song is dull, which food is dull, and who is the dull person? And in fact, what this class 7 student had written would be an answer to what class 12 student had asked. So we went through many discussions, and the students did participate quite well, saying that in some way we are being um, groomed in a certain manner. The society does it, the media does it. I'm not saying anything new here, but when this comes very close to their own being, then they are able to see how so many forces are manipulating them day in and day out. So some stark examples, and Shailesh would also remember this particular student from many years ago, how when he came, he was so passionate about singing Bengali songs. But the popular taste in school was they would listen to some Western songs, and nothing wrong with that. That is what they had grown up with. But this boy was so, at one stage, was began to feel ashamed about singing only Bengali songs, and it really made one feel sad when he came up for one of these songs. It's called a musical evening where everybody is trying to present a song, and he tried to sing an English song. He sang that beautifully too, but to feel that only that has a representation. There are so many such stories, and I know in every school, in every college, in every society, there are these things. But what is that popular story that always is there? And somehow it molds us to thinking that these are the intelligent people, these are the interesting people, or like one of the class 7 students said, these are the cool people. So when they start questioning even their taste in food, in music, and what drives these popular tastes, I think some introspection is happening at that time. I know it's a little broken what I've presented, a little bit here and a little bit there, but if you've got the drift of it, that is what I thought I would share with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jyothi. I think that was really wonderful. You know, a lot of people have been again wanting to know how Krishnamurti looks like in action, right? So when I was looking at your slides, and I'm sure that's true for others as well, so much beautiful, like so many beautiful pictures. The artwork is amazing that you have used as the background, but the poetry that you selected to invoke the discussion on self-understanding, how we look at ourselves and how we look at the world, I think that was really amazing. And what students are able to come up with, like so thoughtful and reflective responses, I think this is like such a good example of how a pedagogy which is interested in awakening sensitivity and intelligence of students, what can it do if you really experiment with it. So really, thank you so much for sharing glimpses of your pedagogical practice. I think it would be really beneficial to the folks who are attending this conference. And uh, Jyothi is also part of the editorial board of Journal of Krishnamurti Schools, where a lot of Krishnamurti, where a lot of people teaching in Krishnamurti schools and who are also administrators in Krishnamurti schools contribute to that journal. I always keep that journal as one of the sources for my holistic education students, that they can draw material upon them. So please check that journal out. It would be very well helpful. So thank you, Jyothi. That was really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ash.
Vaishnavi, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. That will be following up with Shailesh Anna and Jyothi Akka. I will try and see how I place what I am going to share with everyone today. So, good morning to some of you, and good evening to others who are in my part of the world. Thank you for this opportunity, Professor Ashwani and Professor Acharya. And I speak for myself when I say this, that it has given me this time to take an important pause, to think about my work and about Krishnamurti's teachings in this context. I said this earlier too, and it has been wonderful to come together in this forum to be part of this conversation and dialogue. And I found that all the sessions that have happened so far have been meaningful in what they have offered. So thank you for putting this together, and thank you to all the speakers. So that's where I'd like to begin. I would have to go a little back in time because it is essential and important to set a context to my journey as a teacher and how I came to be in touch with Krishnamurti's teachings. When I joined the school in Chennai, I was neither aware of Krishnamurti nor his teachings. I joined the school because I love working with children, and it so happened that I came to know of a vacancy and I applied for the position. I had no idea what this place was all about at that time. I also did not know then that it would become such a significant part of my life. I remember walking into the campus, a wooded pathway, leading up to a wild badam tree. Badam is almond in English. In her keynote address on the first day, Meenakshi ji spoke about the intangible that her students had remarked about when asked, what is it that they cherish about their school space? That is what I felt too when I walked into the campus for the first time. A certain calm and quiet, something about the place that I have never been able to articulate in words and won't attempt to do so even now. I remember at the time of my interview of having a conversation with a group of teachers from the school. I don't recall their faces, but I do remember the tone of that meeting. It was warm and inviting. From then, 15 years ago to now, it has been a journey with Krishnamurti and his teachings, one that has made me delve into the person I am and have grown to be, to understand myself in the light of my work. When I started my work as a teacher at the school, I would often ask this question and wonder to myself, why did Krishnamurti start a school? What was his intention? After all, if it was about looking inwards and understanding the self, which was the pertinent question, why a school? It could have been along the lines of a hermitage, but a school with noisy kids and playful banter. How did he think that such a space would give one that time to examine oneself with the serious intent of unraveling the self? And that is when I picked up Education and the Significance of Life from the school library. It brought to fore the deep conditioning of the human mind. The more I read, the more my questions grew. I realized that I had been going about most of my life as a creature of habit, of tradition that defined me, that I was someone doing the things that were expected of me. I had never challenged myself to break free from this mold, to think in a different way, or to come upon a different process of engaging with what was essential to thinking that I had so easily come to accept in life as a given. The letters to school that Krishnamurti wrote at a point when he could not travel, which is later in his life, and he would write to the schools because he did not have that space at that time to have conversation and dialogue with the teachers and students. These were put together in a compilation, and the book, The Whole Movement of Life is Learning, truly changed my perspective and understanding of life. To begin where one is, to embrace all of myself with all the ugliness and beauty, the fear, the joy, and all of it. That was the invitation to just be. I'm not trying to sound romantic when I say this, but it is not easy to do that, to just be as one is. It requires affection at the most fundamental level for oneself and for life, so that something as beautiful as goodness can flower. Something that he talked about, the flowering of goodness. Now, how does one go about understanding that? Krishnamurti has said, quote, a school is a place where one learns about the totality, the wholeness of life. Academic excellence is absolutely necessary, but a school includes much more than that. It is a place where both the teacher and student explore not only the outer world, the world of knowledge, but also their own thinking, their own behavior. At this time, I also had the opportunity to meet Ahalyaji. Many of you might be familiar with her, a senior trustee with the KFI who was also the principal at the school for a long time. She is no more. But to cut a long story short, I had gone to Vasant Vihar, the study center for Krishnamurti's teachings in Chennai. And she told me one thing that has stayed with me till now. Your work is that of a teacher at school, but remember to dip into the teachings, for that is the fountainhead of that work. That is why perhaps I see the school as a place where I got introduced to myself. In all these years, there have been many experiences, many that have guided me in my tryst with learning. For today's session, I have chosen to speak, at least I'm going to try and do that, on three important aspects of my work that have really touched me deeply. One is the place of relationship to myself and all else around me. Relationship with nature, which is also an extension of me, or if one were to say the other way around. The second is the place of conversation and dialogue. And lastly, the space for reflection. I may go from one to the other, as it is not possible to touch on one without examining the other, so please bear with me. Creating the context to observe my environment in everything that happens in it is an invitation to be attentive and to find inspiration. It is there all pervading in what I see around me. Even as trees change color, leaves fall, flowers bloom, and seasons change, there is something that I learn by just watching these seemingly simple acts of nature. To be able to sit under the tree and watch the leaves as they come swirling down ignite a sense of wonder. The curiosity to find answers to questions that may arise out of these observations, or to just stay with them, either ways, is an immensely insightful and valuable experience. I have been a part of these fleeting, wondrous moments with the students when we have just gone simply for a walk around the campus or the lake close by to just sit quietly without any agenda, observing and staying with that observation. To be alive to all this and to oneself is about paying attention to the physical senses. Krishnamurti says, start with the outer, look at nature. For unless one looks, truly looks, one cannot appreciate and learn from the different hues of nature, which in turn is reflected in one's physical senses and creates awareness. The school trips offer the space to experience learning outside the classroom, of meeting people of different and diverse backgrounds, of engaging with the world at large, and examining questions that are vital to true education. To see that each one of us is not a silo, that there is a connect with the community we are a part of, the society we live in, and finally the world. This has meant holding an idea tentatively, of observing something for what it is, of being able to work with and appreciate another's ideas, and to understand that freedom is not about choice, but perhaps the absence of it. Just recently, I had a conversation around the entire notion of freedom, and this happened incidentally on February 17th, the day when Krishnamurti passed on. When you're talking to 16, 17-year-olds about their understanding of freedom, sometimes it can just stem from what one likes to do. It was interesting to engage with the questions of, why can't I do what I want to do? What is freedom actually? Krishnamurti pushes you to ask these questions and think and go beyond the obvious. When young people try and listen to each other and see the role of responsibility, of care and respect for another, it also asks the same of me, the adult, to examine this. It is not an easy statement to make, to say, I'm a free person. And I think at the end of that discussion, the one question that remained was, are we truly free? As we walk the untrodden paths in the mountains during treks and hikes that we go on as a group of teachers, parents, and students, there are moments of quiet where nothing is heard but the sound of one's breathing in sync with the rustling of leaves on the trees or the soft crunch of dried leaves under one's feet. During these times, the mind and body are working in unison, creating that fine balance between mental focus and physical effort. I have found this quiet to be deeply energizing, both in the physical and psychological realm. I have also found it possible to be an individual in the group, cherishing the solitude that I get during these experiences. Relating to all that is around me, the spaces, the people, both students and colleagues, helps me examine myself as an individual. One can truly see this come alive in school, where every context allows for an examination of belief systems, challenges me to question and inquire. In all this, I have always found that I begin where I am, no judgment. Getting in touch with myself and finding a sense of well being in the person that I am has become an important part of my journey to learn about myself and understand life, and perhaps my own existence. The crisis we talk of today in these times is significant as it is unfamiliar and it challenges this very existence. Catherine Jeffries, I think the other day in her talk, asked a very important question. How does one identify a crisis? That question has stayed with me, for I believe there will be these moments, more so in the future, where we would have to grapple with realities that are beyond our control. To watch what situations do to us, to our minds, is an important area of work that each of us as individuals will have to engage with choicelessly. Each one's experience has something to offer, and in my limited understanding, I can only hope to see that which one feels at their level. I remember once while reading from Krishnamurti for the Young on fear, and one of the students, all of 10 years, asked me, Akka, what are you afraid of? A question that caught me completely unawares. Looking back, I think it was the suddenness of the question that caught me and got me thinking. Not that I did not recognize that I have fear in me, but had I ever accepted it? Did I have the vulnerability and humility to recognize it? And what were my fears? Just yesterday, and I'm saying this with immense happiness because after a long time as teachers, we got to sit together and read something. And we examined the text of Krishnamurti, where we tried to answer what is at the core of our work. We always tell each other, and I'm sure many here who are teachers would agree with me, it would have been so much easier had Krishnamurti left behind a template to follow and we would have just gone about our work. But that's not the case. I guess he wanted each one of us to make our own meaning and not follow him or his words. So to truly engage with what is there in the present and find the truth, it is in these moments that I recognize the importance of asking questions and keeping them alive. For that gives direction to my inquiry and creates the climate for learning. Krishnamurti has often talked about how we are all essentially the same, young and old, at the level of experiencing and understanding our feelings. This inquiry of the self, of making an honest and earnest attempt, of watching thought and seeing its irrelevance, all of this has been possible because of the school, which offers so many things in its intangible elements. The past year has given me the time to pause, to take stock, and to ask some questions of myself. What is important in life? What do I do with all the suffering that I see around me? What do I do with this hurt that is there in me? How do I engage with it with all my honesty? And as Shailesh maybe spoke in his first talk, what is my role as a teacher then, as an educator, working with young people? It is a difficult time, and all I have as space is contained within the four walls around me. And I sit in my small study and look at the laptop screen, trying to ignore the news ticker that keeps telling me how many have died because of the pandemic. It is an interesting time too, for in my newfound solitude, I have begun to pay attention to things around me. It is an unusual time, for I find myself doing things I have not done earlier. I'm more aware, perhaps, of how I'm doing things in my life. It is not the same anymore, and many refer to it as the new normal. I don't know what that means because I don't know anyone does. Things have changed across the world, across communities, and somehow everyone is on the same page. Everyone also has the same question, same thought and query. Will this happen again? Will I lose someone I love? Fear is paramount, and examining it without resisting it, easy to say, but something maybe we all need to do. It is not easy when I have to talk to my students as I take classes for them online to reassure them, for I cannot allay these fears. These are real. All I can do is listen and engage with it, to help them work with it, as much as I'm trying to do so with my own fears. This is also the time I tell them, which is beautiful, because it is a time that offers space, leisure, and slowing down, if one were to look at it that way. And that there is beauty in the world around me if I only choose to see it. For it was always there, even before all this began. I just want to say that I value the space I have in school to be the person that I am, to experience the chaos and the clarity, to be attentive to the noise within, and to also come in touch with the quiet. From the interconnectedness I feel with another in this space, I see the immense possibility of a nuanced approach to living life, of providing the necessary ground to introspect, energize, and grow. I would like to end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your uh, such a lovely narrative and the kind of autobiographical reflections. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure others did too, learning about your journey of coming to Krishnamurti accidentally and then experimenting with his works. I really enjoyed when you talked about the significance of nature, and Krishnamurti has been, I think, talking about as far back as he started speaking. And the other day I was watching a program on global news here in Canada, where researchers are trying to study and really find out if nature actually benefits us, and if it benefits us, then we should formulate some policies and this and that. That seems like such a how to say such a limited way of looking at the our reality, right? That we have to do a research in order to find out whether it is really good to be in nature or not. So that seems like an abuse of science, or not scientific thinking but very retarded thinking. But that's what is going on. So I wish people pay attention to the things that Krishnamurti have said and discover it on their own, whether what happens when you are in nature, right? Rather than depending on some study which will tell you, and then based on that you will formulate programs, then that will you imposed on teachers that you have to do. So this is also that's going on around the world, which I really find problematic. And I'm really glad that Krishnamurti didn't lay out all the policies and things that teachers have to do, because that's what happening going on around the world. It's very prominent in the West because of the prominence of standardized testing and outcomes based education. Teachers are told what to do, how to do it, when to do it. Of course, intelligent teachers create their own freedom and find out a way to challenge it, but it's very difficult. So thank you, Vaishnavi ji. It was really good hearing from you and learning from your experiences. How about we all take a quick 5-minute break, or little less than that, and then we'll listen from Carolyn, Kristen, and Mike. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, everybody, welcome back. I think let's get started. I just want to start with a brief linguistic correction. I used the word retarded earlier when I was commenting on the scientific study. I just want to clarify that this is a derogatory word that has been used to describe people with disabilities. That's not the context in which I was using it. I was using it in the sense of our over dependence on scientific researches sometimes, when the value of being in nature existentially and inherently in all the cultures have been like so well established. I was reading that a doctor was saying that unless she gives a prescription in writing, her patients are not going to go in nature. So that ensures it for them that they are actually going to do. So that to me seems that we are perhaps probably over relying on outside agency or scientific research, as Krishnamurti have always questioned. Uh, in the next panel, we have with us Carolyn, Prest, Kristen Amiro, and Michael Cosgrove. As I was telling you yesterday, those of you who were here, that I have been at Mount St. Vincent University for the past 10, 11 years now. And I have introduced a lot of students to the work of Krishnamurti and to other holistic educators. And I have, because of that, I have met many bright and brilliant students. 3 of them are here with us to share their thought on how they understand Krishnamurti and in what ways maybe they have experimented with his work in their classes or in their ideas. So welcome to 3 of you, and can we go with Carolyn, Kristen, and Mike? Is that a good sequence? Are you all fine with that? Okay. So Carolyn, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So can you hear me, Ashwani?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So my introduction to Krishnamurti was through his dialogues with Alan Anderson in A Wholly Different Way of Living. We read this book in a holistic education course that I took in the fall semester of this last year, that I took from Professor Kumar. Since then, I've been researching and reading about Krishnamurti as preparation for this presentation, but I certainly am still a beginner when it comes to Krishnamurti.
Carolyn, let me interrupt you. Sorry for a moment. I think your video is pausing, so maybe you want to stop sharing your video because your sound is clear. Would you like to do that?
Sure. Yeah, that's rural internet. I'll just pause my video.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Is it still clear now?
Yeah, it's very clear. Yeah.
Okay, great. So as we read A Wholly Different Way of Living, I was most taken by the timelessness of Krishnamurti's ideas. Krishnamurti alludes to our ability to perceive life and the world as it is versus how it appears to the unconscious observer when we're seeing through the glass darkly. He discusses the illusion of reality in the context of organized society, religion, politics, and beliefs in general. A man who really wants to find out if there is eternal, the nameless, something beyond all thought, he must naturally set aside everything based on thought, the savior, the masters, the gurus, the knowledge, all that. These descriptions struck me as similar to many of the ancient philosophers, and specifically Plato's writings on the nature of reality through his allegory of the cave and his realm of the forms. When we study the ancient philosophers, however, there is an amount of context that becomes lost in time. Krishnamurti's work provides us with a more contemporary context. He promotes wholeness and peace and describes a path to those ends in a world that's rife with conflict. His is an updated account of the nature of the reality in which we exist and struggle. I do apologize for reading my thoughts rather than speaking more personally with you all. I've never done anything like this before, and I am kind of nervous. I plan to spend the majority of my given time discussing one of the questions that was suggested as a framework for our talk. In your view, what are the primary crises that modern society faces, including the nature of contemporary schooling? How have these crises been highlighted or exaggerated by the COVID-19 pandemic? I feel that individuals living in rural areas of Nova Scotia are experiencing a loss of identity, which is creating the inability to pursue and achieve self-understanding, which is to me Krishnamurti's most fundamental message to us. That without the ability to know ourselves, we will never be able to coexist with others and in nature in a way that's beneficial to all. As I mentioned in my biography for the conference program, I grew up in Mooseland, a very small community in Nova Scotia, and I've chosen to remain in the same general location to raise my children and pursue my profession. I teach junior and senior high at a local school with about 300 students from grade primary to 12. The school population is made up of students from about 30 smaller communities that surround the one that houses the school. Among these communities, you'll find people with deep generational histories in the area, as well as individuals of the Mi'kmaq First Nation, the traditional ancestral occupants of the province. The community that I grew up in, as well as the one that I now reside in, are the homelands of my ancestors, locations where they chose to settle when they first arrived from Europe. My father, my grandfathers, and those before them have worked in the forest and on the sea for generations. We have found ways to sustain ourselves by coexisting with our environment in a way that has allowed us to earn a moderate living while ensuring that it's not depleted. This history is similar for many of those who live around me, as is the case with most rural communities in Nova Scotia. For generations, our identities have developed around our connections to the nature that surrounds us, and these identities are strong, historical, and indelible. While on the surface, these relationships have served as a means to feed our families, our deep connections to nature have extended far beyond the occupations that have sustained us. Historically, we've seen ourselves as stewards of the land and water and as responsible for ensuring that nature is maintained for the generations that will follow us. In many cases, we've prioritized this symbiosis over our livelihoods. What we see as valuable isn't the monetary aspects of our existence, but our ability to live in nature in such a way that it's possible to ensure that it remains in the state that it's always been. This connection is evident to me every day in the students that I work with. Our rural youth respect, enjoy, and find spiritual nourishment in the nature that surrounds us. They're lucky enough to grow up understanding the timelessness of nature, to be able to experience it and the world in the way that Krishnamurti encourages when he states, when you see the sunset, see it completely. In a wholly different way of living, Krishnamurti mentions a place where he's able to experience a connection to nature. It's an old place, he says, with the hills, and in amongst there is a school with which I am connected and so on. And you feel the enormity of time, the feeling of absolute non-movement. My students experience this connectedness regularly, and it is undoubtedly a part of their identity. They see themselves as protectors of our natural world, as members of the natural community rather than outside of it. When it comes to the natural world, they're incredibly insightful, and their natural intelligence is highly admirable. As we all know, society has been centralizing to urban areas over the past century or so. This is also the reality that we face here in Nova Scotia. While there remains a strong, deeply connected rural population, it's becoming increasingly difficult to access supports and services that were once regular in our communities. where individuals and families were once able to support themselves through a livelihood within their community, often farming, forestry, or fishing. Many are now required to either move or commute to urban centers to sustain themselves and their families financially. As a result, it has become increasingly difficult to reconcile our urge to live rurally with the practicality of it. While the need to exist with nature in this way is inherent in many of us, the practical viability isn't always evident. This results in a loss in the surety in our lifestyles. We question the decisions that we make without thinking and the importance of our values. Many of us still feel this connection to nature, but it's no longer tangible or speakable. While we still identify and sense the connection, it's no longer obvious. Because the importance of living in rural areas isn't always evident to those who do not see our connection to the land, others sometimes seek to impose their order or their meaning on us. This can look like the imposition of businesses that may cause harm to the environment, a redistribution of literacy or mental health services to another community, or simply disdain for a way of life that's different from their own. Because we resist, don't conform or fit the mold, we are sometimes seen as deficient. And after many instances over many, many years, it's difficult to separate the image from our reality. We've begun to lose our identity and consequently the ability to understand ourselves in a way that helps us understand the importance of our connection to the land. This is what I see as Krishnamurti's most important message to us, that we can't live a true, authentic life without understanding ourselves. Because it's now difficult to understand the reasons for our need to live in a way that others may seem as simple as or old-fashioned, we struggle and feel the need to justify ourselves to those who don't understand it. I see the implications of this in my classroom every day. While our youth appreciate and revere nature, their confidence in their lifestyles has diminished, and they are insecure in the larger world. This is where I see crisis. In addition to this loss of identity, services and supports that were once available have been centralized and cut to the point where it becomes nearly impossible to remain in our homelands. It often feels as though we must accept less because others, must accept less than others because we choose to live rurally. If we're unable to access a library or a doctor or affordable produce, it is our fault and our choice. While we're clinging to our innate identities, rather than those that have been imposed by the changes of society, we are suffering for it. Again, this has the effect of creating an even greater divide between our identities, which are bonded to coexisting with nature, and the reality of remaining here. The pandemic has exacerbated these issues in that services are further reduced for us and the need has become greater. Many people in all areas of the world are experiencing a deterioration of their mental health as a result of the loneliness and isolation that necessitates beating this virus. And there's little access to supports for these people. Many people have lost jobs, and poverty is becoming even more pronounced than it had been. Krishnamurti discusses his views on the human relationship with nature and tells that many of us are rapidly losing it. Is it that we are so caught up in our own network of problems, our desires, our urges of pleasure and pain, that we never look around, never watch the moon? He encourages us to be a part of nature and to be in communion with it. Through a proper relationship with nature, where we are able to observe it with our full attention, we are able to truly serve all of our relationships. If there is such communion between you and nature, you can commune with man, with the boy sitting next to you, with your educator, or with your parents. This holistic state is what can be achieved through a true relationship with nature. When Krishnamurti discusses order and disorder in his wholly different way of living, I recognize what's happening to our rural youth. He describes the fragmentation of society and how societies have been built upon this fragmentation. We no longer see humankind as one, but as a series of groups that rival and war with each other. While Krishnamurti primarily focuses on the divide that has been created between countries, I can see that this extends to within societies, and the divide has been created between those of us who live in rural areas and those in more urban locations. In Holy, he states, our societies, our civilizations is built on comparison. When considering the nature of disorder, he states, therefore, I say to myself, is measurement, comparison, imitation, are they not the major factors of disorder? The comparison and measurement that Krishnamurti is talking about here occurs for rural dwellers because we have a different lifestyle than the majority. It has subsequently disrupted our sense of identity. Although this identity still exists deep within, it is no longer as easy to bring it into our consciousness as we did generations ago. As an educator who sees the products of this loss of identity plainly, I consider our steps forward from Krishnamurti's perspective. Krishnamurti discusses the role of education in developing self-understanding in the individual and what the role of education has become in contemporary society. The ignorant man is not the unlearned, but he who does not know himself, and the learned man is stupid when he relies on books, on knowledge, and on authority to give him understanding. Following this, the connection that individuals living in rural communities feel with their environment helps them to recognize themselves in the world around them. Once we're regarded from outside and measured according to another authority or set of knowledge, the understanding becomes depleted. Krishnamurti hints at a change to the concept of education when he states, what we now call education is a matter of accumulating information and knowledge from books, which anyone can do who can read. Education has become a means to a useful occupation. He contemplates how this drive to educate individuals with the goal of filling occupations can be shifted to education's true and most pure role, which is to teach our students how to see themselves, how to understand themselves separately from society and from imposed order. Can one educate a student to live a life of non-comparison? In my context, Krishnamurti speaks clearly. While the sense of stewardship and protectorship of the land is inherent, we are no longer always able to recognize it. We need to reteach our values for the natural world, to build in our students the explicit understanding of why it is that we live where we live, do what we do, and feel how we feel. Once we've taught this, once students see this and understand it in themselves, we begin to reclaim our relationship and its validity. Only then will we create individuals who are able to maintain their truest nature in the face of change. This is what Krishnamurti calls wisdom. Wisdom is something that comes with self-knowing. As he says of nature, if you establish a relationship with it, you have relationship with mankind. You are responsible then for that tree and for the trees of the world. But if you have no relationship with the living things on this earth, you may lose whatever relationship you have with humanity and with human beings. When we're able to build our relationship with nature, reaffirm and build pride in our identities, we produce a sense that we are all together, that we are all human beings, not divided, not broken up, not belonging to any group or race or some idealistic concept, but that we are all human beings living on this extraordinary, beautiful earth. Krishnamurti says. This is how our rural youth can serve humankind and the planet that we live on. They are filled with enormous innate potential, and it's up to educators to build their self-understanding so that they can accept the gifts that they've been given, apply their wisdom, and build something beautiful for the generations to come. Last week, during the Sunday session, there was a question that somebody asked a question about societal crisis and the individual. The crisis that I describe is most definitely a crisis of society, and the effects of this crisis are not only affecting our society at large, but the students I work with as individuals. Is self-understanding too much to ask of the oppressed? In a wholly different way of living, Krishnamurti mentions security and dialogue. He says, because we have security, we can have dialogue. And he also says that the brain can only function in complete security. I believe that crisis can be an almost insurmountable obstacle in one's path to self-understanding, but I think that it is incumbent upon those of us who are able, such as us educators, and those who work with individuals living in crisis to do our best to help them make even the smallest steps towards self-understanding. Self-actualizing doesn't, to me, seem to be an all or nothing occurrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. That was really wonderful. Very original thinking, and the way you have reflected on Krishnamurti's ideas in the context of where you are. It's like really amazing. Unfortunately, I don't have time to make a more elaborate comment, but I just would like to say this: urbanization and technologization and economic development that most of the world is currently obsessed with is really causing a lot of problem to the countryside, to the rural communities, and thereby our connection with the nature. So I really appreciate your thoughts, but we need to keep on moving. And everybody, I just want to say, because we had 6 presenters today, it is nobody's fault that we will be going a little over the time. We appreciate if you have to leave, but we will also appreciate if you continue to stay and support the speakers. Kristen.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kristen Amiro. I teach English and social studies at the high school level, and I've been doing that for about 20 years. I've studied literacy and curriculum studies, and I've always loved to read fiction. One of my favorite authors is the American author John Steinbeck, and his novels and short stories always give me a lot to consider in relation to education. So I'll be focusing on Steinbeck's connection with Krishnamurti's teachings. When I began to read works by Krishnamurti, I quickly made connections between his ideas and those I was observing in Steinbeck's fiction. And part of what keeps drawing me back to Steinbeck's books is the portrayal of his holistic worldview. So I want to talk a little bit about holistic education as well. John Steinbeck was born in 1902. I'm just going to share a screen here so you can see a couple of photos. I hope this works. Are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. So you can see my title here, John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Holistic Education.
Yeah.
Here's an image of Steinbeck. And some of his most well-known books are listed here. So he was born in California in 1902, and very much of his writing is set in that place where he grew up, and he was very much in tune with the land and the ocean. In the 1930s and 40s, he spent a lot of time with his friend named Ed Ricketts. So we'll talk about Ed Ricketts in a little while. Ed Ricketts was a largely self-taught marine biologist and an early pioneer in the field of ecology. So ecology is the field that looks at individual specimens in the greater context of their habitat and the species that share it. So that ecological thinking is very much in line with holistic thinking. So here are some titles of Steinbeck's well-known work: The Red Pony, Of Mice and Men, The Grapes of Wrath, East of Eden, The Winter of Our Discontent. And these last three are set in Monterey, California, which coincidentally is close to where Krishnamurti spent quite a long time, a lot of his life in California. So John Steinbeck and J. Krishnamurti share a holistic vision of the world, and reading them in relation to one another offers insight into the nature of holistic education as it occurs through relationships. Krishnamurti spoke and wrote extensively on education, relationships, and the development of the whole person. So these themes come to life in Steinbeck's literature as well. When people refer to education, they typically describe a formalized training of the mind and character, usually in an institutional and systemic way. Holistic thinking, on the other hand, is the view that the integrated whole exists beyond the sum of its parts. Within the context of education, this means education occurs beyond the formalities, beyond the institutions, beyond the systems, even beyond the curricula. A holistic education incorporates a person's self and their sense of self, and grows and evolves as they learn. Such an education is informed by relationships, a relationship with the self and with others, and in communities such as school, home, work, and other social places. If educators are informed by this view of learning, they can incorporate holistic education into any existing school system by being mindful of their students and very necessarily of themselves as whole people. So some key points from Krishnamurti's thinking that connect with Steinbeck's literature. In his writing and talks, he questions set ways of thinking, such as influenced by religion, culture, and tradition. Krishnamurti asks you to understand your own bias. He hopes to resolve conflict by increasing personal freedom from social expectations. And he theorized extensively on education, relationships, and the development of the whole person. Education, in the true sense, is the understanding of oneself, for it is within each one of us that the whole of existence is gathered. That's a quote from Krishnamurti. When you understand yourself and your internal conflict, you're closer to resolving all conflict. So this is important for students and teachers. It's important to remember as teachers that the student is a whole person individually and in relation to others. So this is connected to that idea of ecology or social, community. Krishnamurti said the function of education is to create human beings who are integrated and therefore intelligent. Two questions I put here for teachers to consider would be, something we can ask ourselves. How do we facilitate integration while maintaining individuality? Also, another question would be, what is it that prevents more cross-curricular collaboration? So as we know, in many schools, the faculties are quite separate and they don't interact much to talk about learning. So, what prevents that? What are those barriers? That's worth considering. Here is, I'll get you to guess what type of place I'm describing here, or what type of place Steinbeck is describing in his 1954 book, Sweet Thursday. He says, this is a place where grievances were brought out and inspected, and quarrels were settled, and all the little matters of interest and despair were turned over and examined for their actual value. So to me, that just sounds like a classroom. But in this particular example, Steinbeck has created an unusual place of learning. This is a room in a brothel where you have workers, discussing with one another in their staff room. Also related to this particular scene in a novel, you have a character named Fauna, who is the madam and broth of the girls at the brothel, or the young women at the brothel. And it says, Fauna nudged and warped and bunted her young ladies toward good nature and kindness. Fauna treats the women who work at a brothel as though she were their mentor or teacher. She behaves in accordance with Krishnamurti, who believes education in the true sense is helping the individual to be mature and free, and to flow greatly in love and goodness. Fauna wants her workers to live up to their potential and to move on and out of the brothel if possible. When they do, she's pleased. I'm going to switch gears here to tell you about this person, Ed Ricketts. Ed Ricketts was one of Steinbeck's best friends, and Steinbeck portrays Ricketts' capacity as a great educator. About his friend, he puts, everyone near him was influenced by him deeply and permanently. Some he taught how to think, others how to see or hear. Children on the beach he taught how to look for and find beautiful animals in worlds they had not suspected were there at all. He taught everyone without seeming to. So here Steinbeck lovingly describes his friend as a holistic educator, and Ricketts' influence is echoed in the character of Fauna that I mentioned earlier and her relationship with her students. Krishnamurti's statement on the relationship between intelligence and education underscores this train of thought. So here is an image of Ed Ricketts in his classroom, which would have been the tide pools on the Pacific Ocean, the coastline of Monterey, California. Like Ricketts, observing animals in their tide pools and their ecosystems, Krishnamurti said, intelligence is the capacity to perceive the essential, the what is, and to awaken this capacity in oneself and in others. That is education. So as Ricketts was exploring through the tide pools and finding new species and contextualizing that information of habitat and which species interact with one another, he was keeping it in context, that everything is related to one another. So he didn't think of the utilitarian purpose of one species out of the context of its ecosystem. To connect all three, Krishnamurti, Steinbeck, and Ricketts were three effective teachers with their own styles: lecture, literature, and lifestyle. All three taught as a consequence of pursuing their own passions, trying to understand the world and to contribute to its improvement. Krishnamurti sought to reduce conflict through intellectual freedom, awareness of the self, and mindful relationships. So as a teacher, it could be useful to consider relationships with people, traditions, and nature in a non-utilitarian way. Steinbeck evokes compassion by telling stories of the marginalized. So in Steinbeck's writing, he doesn't only write about the rich, the powerful, the beautiful. He takes a snapshot of all corners of a community. So he's writing about, the landscape, animals, in that landscape, the people of different social classes, people of different backgrounds all together, and showing how they all work together and add value to the community. Ricketts, as an ecologist, emphasized the connections amongst species. So what can we take from this as educators? I'd say a teacher is someone who gives a person an opening in which to question, to empathize, and to relate. And the student, once a person is aware of themselves as a student of the world, they can be their own teacher and examine relationships and conflicts and pursue their own questions. Here's a little quote from Steinbeck's book of Mice and Men. He says, ideas are like rabbits. You get a couple and you learn how to handle them, and pretty soon you have a dozen. An activity that could be a discussion amongst teachers. You could ask teachers to consider teaching metaphors. So ask how you see the work of a teacher compared to other jobs. And that helps us examine the many approaches we have to education. Thoughts on cross-curricular. When teachers create links from one subject to another subject, the student can become engaged in the bigger picture. So in my English class, for example, it kind of helps if I could refer to another class a student might be taking. If I refer to something going on in their biology class, then that helps them go, oh, this is all connected in some way. Learning and relationships thrive on newness, techniques, topics, people. Keep that in mind in schools. Courage, curiosity, creativity, and connections are as important as the subjects. So thanks for listening. I'll go back here and So I think I might have a couple of minutes in case if anybody had questions.
I think we will ask people to share their questions and comments, Kristen, when everybody is done. So, but thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I really like the way you brought three different figures from three different fields: Steinbeck from literature and Ed Ricketts from ecology and Krishnamurti from spirituality education together. I think it was really good, and the emphasis that you have placed on the significance of courage, creativity, and curiosity, and not just the knowledge that we often think is the primary core of education. Thank you, Kristen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. You are ready?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So my presentation is going to be about teaching Krishnamurti in Philosophy 12 class. And we started teaching Krishnamurti in Philosophy 12 at Dartmouth High School. There are a number of courses in Halifax that have Philosophy 12, and a number of provinces that have this course. And we started reading some of Krishnamurti's dialogues and a few years ago, and it's been great because of its Krishnamurti's approach and foundation in dialogue, and also I think Krishnamurti gives students sort of the inspiration to allow them to question absolutely everything. And in a philosophy course, those are two key things: questioning absolutely everything, and also dialogue itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of the responses to our discussions and let the students do a fair amount of the talking in this presentation, and I'll make some commentary as we go based on so I've typed up a few of their responses to some of our dialogues. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry. Are we okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, so Krishnamurti in the classroom, discussing Krishnamurti in the Canadian public high school. And the two texts that we use are Freedom from the Known and Education and the Significance of Life. So here are some responses to the dialogues we've had on freedom from the known. I think we'll focus on that in this brief presentation. So this is from Krishnamurti. We cannot be alive if our mind is caught in opinions, judgments, and values. And a student responded, this is about living in the moment. Our minds wander too much, I find. We overthink, and it makes everything harder to do. Anxiety is hard to overcome. I have anxiety, and everything seems a challenge for no reason. It's crazy how the mind works. It's an honest response from a student. I think that they're showing an awareness of their own mind and its challenges, limitations, distractions. To me, it seems self-aware and also critical. To the same idea from Krishnamurti. The grand design of our mind is being tied to small matters like opinions, judgments, etc. There's no room to see everything for how it truly is. I think this is another reflective comment from a student. It expresses their awareness that it's, there's more to see than mere opinion. And I like the the phrase, the grand design of our minds is being tied to small matters. This next comment is about, from Krishnamurti. This is this idea that they're responding to. This measuring ourselves all the time against something or someone is one of the primary causes of conflict. And I think the student here is responding. They say, this means that because we focus so much of our energy into striving to be someone else or better than someone else, it results in conflict. And I think that they understand the negative results of comparison and the energy that goes into it. And this idea really sparks engaging dialogue in the classroom, this idea of measuring ourselves against other people. It's usually quite engaging and quite energetic. And you can put a quote like this up on the board and have the students will discuss this for it seems like hours, just the things that that they want to talk about when it comes to some of these ideas. So the same quote, this measuring ourselves all the time against something or someone is one of the primary causes of conflict. And this is another response by a student. We create problems by comparing ourselves to others, and it's the cause of many problems. So-and-so is richer than me, so what can I do to be even richer? I think they give a good example of to them, what a very common way we compare each other, and that is through wealth. Again, on the same idea, another student said, we're always wanting more than we have, what other people have, and comparing all the time to people that appear to have it better than us. And I think that, this idea of us always wanting more is something that we have to keep asking ourselves about. A question that Krishnamurti asks in Freedom from the Known is what gets in the way of our understanding of things. A student responded by saying, what gets in the way of our understanding things is not paying attention to our conditioning. Once we do focus on our conditioning, we are then able to be free from our past. And so we put our attention toward the present. And we had discussions about conditioning, which is one of the first sort of terms that become helpful to discuss in Krishnamurti before we got into this. And that student was using that term to help broaden this idea of what gets in the way. And I think a key part of this is the students feel that there's a lot of people that are trying to influence them, and it's important to be able to look at these influences in their lives and to be more critical of them. Again, to that question, a student responded, our own minds can get in our way of understanding, being afraid of being wrong, being judged, etc. We're afraid of being wrong, so we agree with what we think is right, even if it's not necessarily true. Saying that fear gets in the way of understanding is an important sort of realization, and I think that fear of being wrong, which is a kind of conformity, was pointed out by the student. And again, when we talk about fear in the classroom, which there are not a lot of classrooms, I don't think, maybe there are, but where students get the opportunity to talk about their fears. And again, that's another topic that they can go on for hours about. And I find that it's an engaging part of what the ideas of Krishnamurti can bring to a classroom. Another idea of Krishnamurti's, most of us walk through life inattentively, reacting unthinkingly, according to the environment in which we have been brought up, and such reactions create only further bondage, further conditioning. I think this shows an understanding of our conditioning by giving the example of, sorry, I'm going to read this response here. We need to let go of what we've been conditioned to believe in order to be free. If you've been learning from early young age that kindness means giving expensive gifts, maybe because your parents spoiled you with toys but didn't spend time with you, then that pattern will continue to affect how you see the world. You might value material things over people and relationships and end up feeling lonely and unsatisfied. To stop the pattern, you have to be aware of your emotions and what causes them. I think this shows an understanding of conditioning by giving an example of patterns of behavior It acknowledges a tendency to value material things over people and relationships, and how it can result to loneliness. The only way to stop the pattern, which is conditioning, is by being aware of it. And I think that's interesting at the end, that the student's critical of the only way to stop is to recognize, the pattern, that you have to be aware of it first. I thought that was very insightful. Another student to the same quote, an idea, said, "We're so scared to be ourselves because we're so worried about judgment that we'll try and be someone else." I think comparison can take on a different scope than, for children in high school, and then, maybe some of us might engage with. But, fear and its effect on their freedom is something that is important for them to realize. And I think that they get it. This one I find interesting because it talks about this idea in a, technological context, this idea of comparison. I find that social media makes this issue of comparison even bigger. Without social media, we would only be, to an extent, comparing ourselves with the people around us, but now it is on such a larger scale. I think comparison can take on a different scope than maybe Krishnamurti could have imagined, although it is still the same thing. But in this case, the student is reflecting about this idea of comparison in a much larger context than just, the ecosystem around them. That social media opens up much more avenues to comparing, and so that's something that's worth thinking about. And then finally, this is our last sort of student reflection that I've typed out. This one says, "Everyone is conditioned to go to work at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time, and wake up at a certain time, repeating the cycle without thinking twice." It's interesting because most people think that's all there is to life and forget we're living right now, and what you do with the time you have now and how your future turns out is entirely up to you. Personally, when I was always skipping school, I realized how your future turns out is entirely up to you. And if you get stuck in the cycle of constant conditioning, striving toward happiness, you will never find it within yourself. I found this comment by a student to be pretty interesting because this idea of that happiness has to be something you strive towards was not fulfilling this student, and so they stopped coming to class and thought about it some more. And when they realized that maybe happiness isn't something that you have to strive for, it allowed them to be free from, the disappointment that they were facing, that their education wasn't giving them. And anyway, the students started coming to class, which is good. Anyway. So I guess in terms of relevance of teaching Krishnamurti in the classroom, I'll just stop this here. In terms of teaching Krishnamurti in the classroom, I think that the ideas of Krishnamurti awaken students' ability to confront their psychological the problems that they face. I think they all know that the world is in crisis environmentally and politically, but there's a helplessness about these types of crises that make them feel empty. But however, by confronting the crisis within themselves, their fears of judgment, their search for self-worth through comparison, the overbearing influence at times of the adults in their lives, the dread of the future, the expectations they face, it's evident to me that Krishnamurti's ideas and emphasis on questioning the causes of those internal crises are critical, important, and helpful for them. I notice a very awakened class when we discuss Krishnamurti's ideas. And as long as this persists, I'll continue to engage with these ideas in a Philosophy 12 classroom. I think that when we talk about some of these ideas in class, that it helps students with things like questioning their educational choices. It helps them rethink the view that they have of education, which and the purpose of it, which a lot of them never, see as something other than a path to success, and they haven't even asked what success actually is. So that there are many examples of students, like tangible examples, who have changed their field of study after engaging in some of these ideas and said, you know what, I'm not going to go into this particular program. I'm going to follow a different path, and I found that interesting. I see them growing internally, acquiring language to discuss their thinking. Terms like conditioning and conformity are ways into asking questions about their fears and anxieties, which is important. They also seem to be able to ask more questions. They're slower to react. I think in Krishnamurti's the importance of questioning why we always need to react and judge instead of taking something in and understanding it as a goal first before we react or take a stance is important. I see them become better listeners. And also I use this as a framework to discuss environmental philosophy, and it's a nice parlay into that. There's also a documentary film called I Am, which is something we do usually right afterwards as well. And the documentary I Am poses two questions: what's wrong with the world, and what can I do about it? And the title itself is very Krishnamurti-like because it's based on this idea that there was an essay contest by the Times in London, which asked the question, what's wrong with the world? And a very famous essayist wrote, "Dear Sir, I am." And the documentary film goes into, and tries to answer those two questions. It's a very internally looking documentary. So to sum up, Krishnamurti has been enlivened the students in the classroom in Philosophy 12. It's been very relevant, very timely. And even though sometimes there can be some uncomfortability, there can be some students that, get aggressive. There are some students, I think, that sometimes don't want to delve into these issues. And, occasionally some of them will just, they'll shut down. It's a bit overwhelming at times. I'm talking about these kinds of crises, and there's a certain intensity to it as well. But all those things are, natural, and it's been a great addition to the Philosophy 12 curriculum. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Mike. That is so awesome. Like in a Canadian public school, and for those who are from India, government schools are called public schools in Canada. So in a government funded, in a public school, using Krishnamurti in such an intelligent and engaging way, I think that's just awesome. And that shows that the kind of ideas that Krishnamurti is emphasizing upon, those are not ideas only meant for students of Krishnamurti schools. They are the ideas that has relevance to people around the world, children around the world. And you said that you face challenges in your sometimes challenges in your classes. How you have been, like all three of you have been in my classes. I do experience those challenges too. Some students don't like it. Some students find it very challenging, very difficult to handle. They don't want to deal with it. But our work is just to keep on going. If I hadn't kept on going, you wouldn't have engaged with Krishnamurti, and then the engagement wouldn't have furthered, right? And engaging with Krishnamurti is basically engaging with the existential questions and yourself. Krishnamurti is just a name. It's basically the existential questions that are relevant that he highlighted. Thank you so much. It was great hearing from all three of you. So chat is enabled now. We are a little over time, but I think that's okay. Those of you who wants to stay can stay. Those of you who are not able to stay can leave, including the presenters. But everybody, please share your thoughts, questions and comments, anything that you would like to share with the speakers. That would be good.
And if the speakers from the first panel can just turn on the videos too, I'll bring you back up onto the screen.
Yeah, if you're still here, yeah, that would be great. Yeah. So Colleen Netchell is saying, our care of intuitive senses is important. My question is about political engagement. We can change ourselves, and this is important. It too is important to become responsible and engaged citizens. How does this fit into Krishnamurti's views? I think we have been discussing that throughout the first part and the second part, but anybody would like to respond to that? Mike, would you like to respond to this question? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. Class is
That's
on.
Yeah, well, I think of the quote by Plato, who says the price of not of apathy is dangerous, right? And so political engagement is important. I feel like, but the first thought I had is like, unfortunately, in politics, who you know gives you, it seems, much more ability to get ideas to the forefront. That's the sad reality. And so for a lot of people, I think getting engaged politically it does seem as though they're not going to have ideas heard because they're so far down the line. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So how do you solve that? Like, so I'm just a guy here, if I don't know anyone politically, I get a vote, which is important. I assume we vote, but how do my ideas? Is the political realm a waste of time? Some people might ask, because no one's going to listen to me anyway.
The question is saying that unfortunately that this does make sense, which is very true, right? Which is very true. Would anybody else like to respond to that question before we move to the second question? Okay. Next question is, was there any form of consent taken or preparation embodied with the students whose work with poetry and whose words responses during philosophy 12 were shared today? Well, I think I can just quickly ask, because I don't think this is a question for which will illuminate a lot of things. Those were anonymous, and I think that's perfectly fine. They may have been part of the student evaluation and all that. So as long as they were anonymous or paraphrased by Mike, I think that's not important. Curious how people think Krishnamurti ideas relate to a sense of agency. Anybody? Laurie wants to know how Krishnamurti's ideas relate to a sense of agency. I think this is important. These questions keep coming back and back, because as soon as you say that the Krishnamurti focuses on existential awareness of oneself, a lot of people begin to think that that means it has nothing to do with political engagement or critical engagement with the society. I really think when you are awakening within yourself, everything around you is awakening. So your engagement with the world is actually much more intense and thoughtful, rather than just simply being driven by a particular ideology. But anybody else would like to respond to that question?
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Back to the idea of agency and politics. There are many different types of leadership roles that we take. I mean, a teacher is one, a professor is one. All those are ways that you are leadership positions. And I think that I'm borrowing an idea here again from Plato, but the belief that he suggests is that you have an obligation to be a leader in a position that you think you could do a better job of. So if you're able to challenge for a position where you lead people, and you think that you could do a much better job for whatever reason, maybe it's a type of thinking that you disagree with, or you think that someone doesn't care enough, or there's things you could do that someone else couldn't, then you have an obligation to take on that position. And he thinks the only reason to lead politically is because you think you can do a better job than someone else. I don't know.
That's
so it's a responsibility.
Thank you. There is one question that is for panels of from India. What is the approach that the Krishnamurti schools in India follow for the online learning in the new normal times without compromising the intrinsic quality of the K approach, by Dr. Anuradha Ajit? So I think it would be really good to hear from all three of you briefly, Vaishnavi, Shailesh, and Anantha. Would you like to share?
Sure. I think there has been an inevitability to the whole thing. We have also had to go online. And that is the reality of the times at the moment. The difference perhaps would be when we look at other schools just jumping headlong into being on screen with the academic lessons that need to be taught. The number of hours spent online have been worked carefully. So the screen time is not as much as it would be for another school, a regular school, if we could call it that, or a non-Krishnamurti school. That is one part of it. How do you keep the intrinsic quality? Now, that's a very difficult question to answer, because what happens in the school, in the physical space, is so much more than what can happen on screen. But I think across the schools, I'm sure I speak for all the K schools, the attempt has been to keep as much of the relationship with the children alive as is possible in this limited medium. And therefore, an expression of poetry, of discussion, of conversation, of still being able to take up questions that are important for young people to understand and work with, that has not been compromised on. But yes, the physical spaces of the schools, which are so closely woven with nature, that is something that we all have missed, and we cannot make up for that on the screen. So I think that's where we are. Shailesh and Jyothi Akka, you can also add on.
Yes, I think you have put it aptly. There is, of course, a huge loss in, you don't have access to nature, you don't have access to so many things, and having personal contact is also lost. But you do have the possibility of having conversations where you talk about things. So at least the conversational space is there, and I think we do have to use it to the maximum. So though there are many losses, there are also a few things which are available. Possibility of having conversations with small groups of children, possibility of bringing up issues, using online resources which you would not have used otherwise. So that's it. I think you also put it, whatever you said is right.
Jyothi, would you like to share as well?
A quick answer. Actually, the screen is not as flavorless and odorless as it seems to be. I did dread engaging with the students. For example, I was to teach drama, and I thought, how am I going to do it? It was not all that difficult. But academics apart, I would just like to share what parents have been asking us. They are not so much worried about the academics because they thought somehow we would be able to deliver. But they said, could you do something else for our children? What you would be doing at school? That has been a challenge, but we've been trying to meet it. The minds are alive, whether on screen or in the classroom, and that is what we need to engage with.
Thank you. Well, I think because we are way over time, so I will just ask one question. And if you all would very briefly respond to that question, I think that would be really great for the teachers around the world who would be watching this. So, one thing, one idea, one insight that you would like to share with the teachers around the world when they are teaching the kids, what is the one thing that you think you would like them to emphasize, to adopt, to emphasize in their classrooms? So I'll just ask one by one. Anybody can go, and then everybody can share very briefly.
Well, I think I would just say, repeat something which Krishnaji himself emphasized, that is learning how not to react, learning what it means to be reactive all the time, and learning how to be quiet and to not react. I think it's an area of learning for all of us.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll go next.
Sure.
I think we quite often underestimate how students can think. Even young students are capable of deep thought. And when we open up certain questions or have certain discussions, we are always surprised.
Thank you. Mike, Kristen.
Do I have to go next?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like...
please. It doesn't have to be, but yeah, please
All
go
right.
ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking that how important it is to hold something tentatively and not to come to conclusions. I think that's a very important thing in the process of learning, because you keep unpacking and unraveling as you go along. So not to have something cast in stone, but to hold things tentatively and to keep working at that. So that's something that I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
I think that I see value in taking time to pause and reflect. Similar to the way you taught the classes that I took with you, Ashwani, taking time for students to reflect on themselves and their learning and their understanding.
Thank you. Kristen, maybe we'll just follow the sequence.
Sure. I think students don't get a lot of opportunities to reflect on their own thinking. And as teachers with a place, a platform, whatever, an opportunity to have students examine their own bias, examine their lenses. I was just thinking about how I often draw a big pair of eyeglasses on my whiteboard, and then I write keywords about different elements of my experience that inform the way I see the world, and I have the students do the same thing. So just to examine their bias overtly and take time to digest too, I think that's really important. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having
Thank you.
allowing me to participate.
Mike?
And maybe building on one of the other ideas, don't be afraid of sometimes the quietness, the silence that can follow a question. Sometimes you need to sit with it. I think that's important.
Thank you. Well, to all the panelists, to the Canadian teachers and the Indian teachers, I think that this session was really wonderful, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees have been thinking about what happens with Krishnamurti's philosophy, how do teachers work with it in Canada and India and all that. So I think it was really good to listen to all of you and to learn from all of you. This was really good. Nayha, would you like to say something before we close?
No, I know we're far over time, but I mean, as everybody tremendously enjoyed both panels today, and I can tell that everyone did by the number of people who are still here despite our going over time. And not to idealize, but I felt like what a different world we might be in if we all got to be your guys' students. So thank you again for sharing your time. And to all the attendees, we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. And tomorrow we've got an exciting panel. Today we heard from teachers. Tomorrow we're going to hear from students and what their students have been up to in their lives. So that's going to be a great way to close up.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And please do come tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.